Yeah, I watched that Diddy documentary and I have so many thoughts. All right. First, I'm going to say this. So during the federal trial, I felt like they were accusing Puff of ridiculous things, like accusing of him running a criminal enterprise and using bad boys like this front and all of this stuff, and for S trafficking and D drugs trafficking and all of that. I felt like that was just outlandish. And I will be completely honest, I still feel that way today. I don't feel that there was any basis for those accusations. I feel like this was a guy. I feel like Puff is someone who was just had a lot of money, had a lot of power, and had a lot of resources to gain access to these workers and drugs and things like that for his own personal enjoyment and use. And of course, to impart control others by having them under the influence and so forth, right? I'm going to keep it a buck. Being from New York, a part of me felt like there was room for redemption for him. I felt like after seeing the Cassie video, it was horrible, it was indefensible, but I felt like, you know what, maybe the D-Rugs just got to him so bad, he just spun out of control, but he can possibly, things a little bit better. They just had a really explosive relationship. After watching this documentary, I feel completely different. And it kind of brought me back to like 94, 95, and that era where I used to think Puff was the worst. I thought Puff was a snake back then. I was a huge Pac fan. And I was like, damn, really did Pac dirty, XYZ. All of that came back for me yesterday watching that documentary. So the Diddy documentary just really solidified how much of a grind ball, how much of a slime ball Puff is. And it brought me back to that time in 94, 95, where I felt like watching them as young as I was, I just felt so much anger towards what they did to Pac, what I felt Puff did to Pac. And it brought me back to that time. And I like as it goes on, we tend to forget about those things and we tend to like these figures that we grew up on, especially being from New York. We're like, these icons, wow, look what they did in the game. And we tend to forget a lot of the bad stuff that comes with them, right? But it brought me right back to that. A couple of moments in the documentary that really solidifies that Puff is just no damn good for me was there was one segment with Kalina from Dirty Money where she spoke about going through a civil case where she was fighting for her children, and Puff was talking to her about all of his woes that he was facing. He asked him for a measly $5K to help fight for her children, to get some better attorneys. And Puff denied her and said, I'm doing something else right now. I can't. $5K to Puff is like 50 cents to me. And I know when it's people like that, they hit him off all over the place. But it doesn't sound like Puff ever looked out for people monetarily. It talked about him charging Biggie's estate for the funeral costs. He didn't even cover that. So I've never heard of a time where Puff was hitting people off. I own a small business. I have a couple of really wealthy, high-paying, like multi-million, billionaire clients. I can assure, like, they hit off all the time. And you hear about these people, the client I have, people say that about them all the time, how generous they are. I have never once heard someone say that about Puff, ever. Ironically, and as the tables turn like they do, and Puff said this himself, what goes up must come down. What comes down must go up. He said this. He reached out to Kalina later on, and said to her, hey, came out with her lawsuit against him. He called Kalina and said, hey, I need you to get in front of this. I need you to speak out on my behalf. And like, this isn't true. Yeah. It was like, mouth, she said, like, that's stuffed up. Like I Jew and you didn't do that for me. And she still spoke out in his defense, and said that she didn't see any of that. Maybe he gave her the $5K after that. I don't know. Right? I wouldn't have done it for him. I wouldn't have done it for him. I'm going to keep it a bean. He all of those people wrong. There was another part where he spoke where escort that came out, and we've all seen this escort come out saying that, that he did with him and Cassie, and he linking up with them for 8 years and all of that. The escort talked about how every year on Big's anniversary of Big's unaliving, on March 9th, he will call him and they will have these freak offs. I don't know if this was a way for him to cope. I do tend to believe that Puff had something to do with that. And I am not a conspiracy theorist. I tend to think that I'm pretty smart. All right. I'm not like one of those fools online that listens to like Jaguar Wright, people like that, that are like Orlando Brown, these like people that completely out of their trees. But after watching this documentary, it's getting a little bit harder to deny that that may be plausible that he had a hand in Biggie's unaliving at this point. There was a moment where Gene Deal spoke about how Puff said to him, I don't care if Big has to go, whoever. It just seemed like it seemed to me Puff was scary and he wanted to get to the money and he was just pressured and he wanted the situation to go away. And to me, he wanted to take everybody out of the equation and just start over him without all of this baggage, without Biggie, without Pac in the way, without Suge. To me, that's the impression that I got. And for Gene Deal to say that he said that to him, I don't care if Biggie got to go, and then he goes, and then all of this other information comes out, I believe that it's highly plausible Puff had a hand in that, especially where they talked about how, well, Kirk Burrows said, I believe it was Kirk Burrows that said Puff wasn't. So where he says, that was supposed to be flying out to the UK or something like that, and Puff calls and says, I'm canceling his flight, or I canceled his flight. Biggie didn't want to be there. I mean, at this point, we haven't seen anything to suggest that Puff is just this wonderful person that is incapable of doing something as diabolical as setting Big up. Right? Prior to this documentary, maybe we could be like, never talk, it doesn't look good, but there's nothing really there. The way that they framed this made me believe that he is capable of doing it. So that's my thoughts on it. Completely changed my outlook. Let me know your thoughts. Comment below. And I know people are saying like, oh, he's buying the prison, all the turkeys for Thanksgiving and all of this stuff. That's ego. Just a lot of people do when they give out turkeys in the hood. Yeah, it's cause, and you can't really talk smack about it. But for a lot of people's ego is to be like, in New Jack City. To me, it was their way of saying like, we're above, we're in the show. I don't think a lot of it was because they were just altruist, well-to-do people, like people that cared about other people. It just was like an ego thing. Like, I'm the man. I could do this. I can afford it. I'm paid. To me, that's a lot of that with Diddy doing that. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Comment below. This is wild. I'm out.